Whoops. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Pat, and I'm an alcoholic. And I have the privilege of serving as your Area 11 chairperson. And I was thinking on the way up here of, how did I end up with this job? And I was thinking about how I ended up in AA and how I ended up having the privilege to be able to speak up here. And the bottom line is, it was because I threw up in the wrong places, blacked out in the wrong places, ended up in the wrong states, and getting sober, I'd never had enough sense to say no when somebody asked me to do something. So that's how you get wherever you get in service. And I have seen many, many people learn to shine in this program through service. Debbie, Donna, Kelly, women and men that I have seen change. And I was thinking about what it has done for me. Because I will talk about service, because you're going to have an AA speaker talk about the sobriety part and the recovery part of this program. And I am so grateful that I am sober, that the only way I could show a sense of gratitude was to say yes when somebody asked me to do something. And I thought about when I first came in here, like the rest of us, service starts at the home group, and I can remember being asked to hand out cake at a birthday party, anniversary. And I was so scared that I went into the bathroom and sat there until they finished handing out the cake, so that I didn't have to go up to somebody that I didn't know and hand them a piece of cake. We come a long way in this program, I'm just sweating slightly standing up here at this microphone. And the second thing I was thinking of as I drove up was my first legacy breakfast was number 2. Louise A. was the speaker. She was our delegate at the time, a very vibrant, alive woman. And there was a table down front where people kept on getting up and doing the things at the microphone. And I wonder how you get to be one of them, I wonder how you do that. You must have to be around a long time, and they have to let you in that private club, And so I just didn't know that much about it. But I went to this wonderful Friday morning women's meeting. These women got me sober. They took me in. They patted my head. They told me it was okay to cry for the first 2 years. They helped me with my sons, and I'd sit there and cry with them and say, how am I going to manage this? And they told me all these feelings were right when you were getting sober. It was a scary business. And somebody, I think it was Jeannie, came back one day and said, PI needs some help. And I had no idea what PI was, but I'll go, I figured you have to be around a long time before you have to do anything. I could just sit in the back. And so I went to this PI meeting, and it was getting close to Oyster Festival time, and they said, oh, you can go to the town meeting and show them their liability insurance and tell them that you're from the AA contingent, There I was, about 2.5 years sober, and blowing my anonymity to the town of Norwalk. And ever since then, that journey has been, part of my sobriety. But more importantly for me, it was, what can I give back to the life that you all gave me? The reality is, for me, my sobriety means that I'm alive, and if I was drinking, I'd be dead. And there's so much fun part of service, but the bottom line is that without service, it wouldn't be there for the newcomer. We wouldn't have that white schedules book. We wouldn't be able to hand that out. We wouldn't have somebody from corrections and treatment showing up at a halfway house. We wouldn't have somebody putting folders and brochures in the libraries so that somebody doesn't want anybody to know how they're drinking and why they're drinking. Maybe can slip one of those little brochures into their pocket and maybe read it all on their own. That's what service is about for me, and trying to maintain that means everybody doing our bit. Without this, I would be dead, as I've said. And so it's such a joy to be able to give back It is also such a joy to be able to introduce our main speaker. One of the benefits, if you get on this committee, is to get to go to have dinner with the speaker on Saturday night, and that's always fun because you get to meet people that come from not around here, hear their story, get to meet other alcoholics, knowing that this is absolutely global. This is global. Did you know that the big book's translated into Swahili? Okay, it's global. So, with great pleasure, I want to introduce our main speaker, Bobby C. from Philadelphia.
How you doing? Can you hear me? No? Up more? How's that? They said one's for the taper and one's for the loudspeaker, so I said I got to talk out of both sides out of my mouth. My name's Bobby Kuyo. I'm an alcoholic. Can everyone hear me now? No? You can't hear me at all? How's that? This one? Okay. Cool. All right. I'd like to thank District 6 for inviting me to come up, and Blair, who was very kind to Emily and I. It was a beautiful ride home, beautiful ride up. Hopefully it'll be a beautiful ride home, not as long as it was yesterday, but, you know, it's great to be here. Chapter 5 of the Big Book is real clear. I am supposed to tell you in a general way what my life was like and as an active alcoholic, what happened to me, and what my life is like today as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is June 2nd, 1988. I grew up in a very blue-collar ethnic neighborhood in Philadelphia. 7 brothers and sisters. We had no booze at all in my house. My father did not drink, and my mother could not drink. My mother suffered from a history of mental illness and abused prescription medications, so we had no booze at all in the house. My grandparents lived around the corner from us, and that's where I had my very first drink. They had a bar in their basement, and I loved my grandparents. You know what? I was embarrassed about them because, like in my neighborhood, my grandparents were immigrants. They talked funny, and it's amazing because I thought everyone in my neighborhood talked funny. But that's where all the family functions were held: the christenings, the parties, the graduations, and things like that. And that's where I had my very first drink. See, I never felt a part of, and that's pretty tough to do. Like we had 10 people living in a small 3-bedroom row home, but I never felt a part of. And that would be true even leading into my early recovery. But what had happened the first time I had a drink, I didn't get drunk, but I remember what it was. That my grandparents, there was a party in their basement bar. And I remember what we were drinking. It was Ballantine beer. And I remember that because Ballantine used to sponsor the Phillies. And I remember going up to Connie Mack Stadium with my father and the old scoreboard in right center field. And I was running around the basement bar polishing off the half-empties. Or the half-fulls, I guess it depends on your perception. But I was polishing off the half-empties, and my uncles were saying, look at Bobby, look at him. And that's what I craved. I craved the attention, you know. And I always did, you know. And like I said, I grew up in a very blue-collar ethnic neighborhood. Success was measured by, I guess, what union book you got. Everyone wanted to be get a union card, and there were certain levels. The iron workers were up on top, then the electricians, and worked their way down. Or you became, God forbid, a cop or a fireman. But, you know, that's the type of neighborhood it was. Now, I went to a private Jesuit high school, and right that way I felt kind of different because most of the kids who went to this school were from affluent families from the suburbs. It was just me and a couple other dirtballs in the neighborhood who went to this school. And right away I felt kind of different because we used to walk to school, so right away we had some sort of reputation. You know, and these kids were getting dropped off by their parents in their luxury automobiles, beautiful cars. And me and the guys from the neighborhood were inside robbing their lockers. And I knew that was wrong, but I did it anyway because the need for me to be accepted by you outweighed anything else. So I was like your entertainment committee. And whatever values or ethics had instilled in me by the nuns or by my parents had went out the window because the need for me to be accepted by you outweighed anything else. So I really was operating without principles from a very young age. It was funny, my freshman year at the prep, it was football season. There was a football game. It was an away game. We rented a bus. There was drinking. There was fighting. There was police activity. It was a great time. And I remember the first day back, we all had to go see the disciplinarian. So he had us lined up outside his office. And there was about 10 of us. Now, the other 8 kids were all upperclassmen. It was just me and another kid from the neighborhood. We were the only freshmen, and we were there only like 2 or 3 weeks. And the priest came up to us. He said, "What's with you guys? You guys here 2 or 3 weeks, and you're getting this jackpot already?" And I just shrugged my shoulders. I said, "You know, Father, just one of them things." And what it was, it didn't take me long to size up situations. Like when I got there, I wasn't an athlete. I didn't hang out with them kids. And I really wasn't, I didn't hang out with the kids, the AP kids. I found out who was drinking and it was about partying, and that's who I hung out with, And that would be the story of my life. I would size up situations fairly quickly and pick a team who I want to hang out with. It was funny, I didn't set the world on fire at the prep, but I didn't do badly either. I gave the bare minimum effort required to get by. And again, these were goals I would set for my life. Mediocrity. I didn't want to get jammed up where I got in any trouble, but I just gave just enough to skate by, and that's what I did at the prep. And when it came time to graduate, I really had no desire to further my education. And it kind of took my parents off because they made a lot of sacrifices to send me there. So I knew I couldn't stay home because there'd be hell to catch. And I couldn't get an apartment. I had no money. I had no skills. I really didn't have anything, any options. The only option left for me was to join the service, and that's what I did. I enlisted in the Air Force, and that really wasn't a bright move because back then nobody else was going. In fact, there were guys who were still up in Canada, But I went over, I joined, and I wound up getting sent overseas, and I spent 13 months overseas, and that's where my drinking really took off. And I never messed around with other substances. There were a lot of guys from my neighborhood who had gone over and got whacked on certain things, but I had a fear of other substances. But I definitely had a drinking problem at this point. I was there a couple months, and several good friends of mine got killed, and I didn't know how to handle that. Because in my family, we didn't talk about nothing. It was all surface stuff, And once you moved out of the house, whether you went away to school, whether you got married, you were no longer privy to the secrets of the family. Everything stayed inside you, and as long as you stayed in that house, everything stayed within the walls of the family. And that's not a shot at my folks, that's just the way it was. So I didn't know how to handle this when my friends getting killed. But I knew that booze numbed the pain, and that's what I did, And the same thing in the Air Force, I did not distinguish myself, but I didn't get any jackpots either. I gave the bare minimum effort required to get by. Just went to skate by without drawing any attention to myself. When my tour was up, I came home. I wound up taking a couple civil service exams, and then I enrolled in school at St. Joe's College. And so I'm at St. Joe's for a bit, and the same thing there, not setting the world on fire. And one day, one of the kids from my neighborhood had called me up. He said, "Bobby, the Phillies are playing tomorrow afternoon." It was one of those businessman specials, like one of those weekday, like 12-15 games. And they said, "You want to go?" I said, "Sure." Because they weren't going to miss me in the classroom because I wasn't participating there either. So I remember it was towards the end of the semester. It was in May, and it was an unusually hot day. And the Phillies have since moved. They're playing in Vet Stadium down in South Philadelphia. And I'm sitting up at the 700 level drinking that cheap, watered-down beer. And I'm getting trashed. And I told one of the kids I was with, I said, "You know what?" I said, "I'm going to run down the field and meet one of the players." And they said, "That's okay, Bobby." And they shrugged me off. Because, one of the nicknames I had was Bullshit Bob. I said, "I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this." I did that. I didn't do nothing. I just drank and made stories up. But what I did do, I worked my way into the old picnic area they had, and I jumped over the fence there, and the San Diego Padres were in town. And Dave Winfield was the right fielder for the Padres. And I was running around the field like about 10 minutes, but it was probably closer, maybe like a minute or so. And I ran down right field, and I shook Dave Winfield's hand. I said, "Hi, Dave, how you doing?" And he looked at me, he said, "Brother," he said, "what are you doing out here?" And from behind him, I saw the guards coming. I said, "Dave, I got to go now." So I start running towards the infield, and I want to slide into second base. But as I was running towards the infield, there was security coming from the third base side, and if I knew if I would do that, I would get caught. So I turned and start walking towards first base, where there was more security coming. And I don't know, I'm probably about 10, 15 feet away from the guard. I'm walking, I'm going to give myself up. At the last second, I deked the guy, and I ran in the outfield. I just got out in the service. I was in great shape. I'm running around like a lunatic, right? But I got nowhere to go. I mean, the fence is like 12 feet high. I'm drunk. I'm out of breath. I'm about to get sick. I just stopped running, I said, up on the scoreboard, they put Mr. Excitement. They couldn't catch me. So I'm waiting in the outfield, just waiting for the guards to come. And they were taking me off the field, and I got a standing ovation from 37,000 people. Tug McGraw was in the bullpen for the Phillies. He gave me the thumbs up. He said, way to go. Now, I knew I was going to get a beating from these guards. That was okay. They could have beat on me all day long. I don't care. Because these are the types of stories I used to tell, you know. But no one would believe me. But I had 4 guys in the neighborhood who were up in the 700 level. They were my witnesses. I knew that this story, I could drink the next week for free off this story. You know? So the guards could have beat on me all day long. And just as I was about to get my beating, a Philadelphia police lieutenant came up to me. He said, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "Are you drunk? Are you high?" I said, "No, I'm not. I was just happy. Just happy to be here." He said, "Well, you better get your happy ass out of the stadium." And that was important because not only did he save me from getting a beating, but it saved me from getting arrested. Because that was important. Because one of them civil service exams I took, you know, when I first got out of the service, kind of panned out. And 4 weeks later, I was at the Philadelphia Police Academy, you know. They was hiring anybody back then. You know. I tell you that story for a couple of different reasons. One, it's the only funny story I got. You see, because I wasn't a funny guy. You know, I was a liar, thief. I was a lying, thieving, stinking, falling down, violent drunk. If I hung around you, you had something I wanted. I used and abused every person I came in contact with. Second of all, and probably more importantly, is I was a major blackout drinker. From the very first start, just drinking beer. And I remember the next day I would show up at the corner, and the guys in the corner would tell me what I did the night before. "Hey, Bobby, do you remember this?" And I said, "No." So they would tell me the story, and later in the day, I would repeat that story. "Hey, Bobby, what you do last night?" And I would tell them, and I had no recollection of the incident at all. I was a blackout drinker from my very first start. So, I'm in the police academy. Now, I got hired. Now, back then, it was pretty interesting. Our mayor at the time was a guy by the name of Frank Rizzo, and he himself was a former cop. And there was 8,300 of us, and we were like a gang with badges. We could do whatever the hell we wanted to do. And once I graduated, I spent most of my time in uniform in North Philadelphia, where I would see the ravages of alcoholism and drug addiction day in, day out. And at the end of the tour, I would go out with guys in the squad, and I would, you know, there were things I saw on the job that bothered me, but I couldn't tell my coworkers that because I didn't want to be thought less than. I wanted to be one of the boys. To the point where I even engaged in behaviors that I knew that was wrong, but I did it anyway because the need for me to be accepted by my coworkers outweighed anything else, you know. And, you know, like I said, I saw alcoholism and drug addiction day in, day out. And the handwriting was on the wall for me. Now, I'm not even old enough to drink in the state at this time. The drinking age in Pennsylvania was always 21. At that time, the drinking age in Jersey was 18. And where I lived in Philly, I could be across the bridge in Jersey quicker than I could be other parts of Philadelphia. But once I got on the job, you know, doors opened up for me, you know. And the handwriting was on the wall quickly. There were a lot of family members on the job, you know. I remember one day I was at work and the supervisor pulled me off to the side. He said, "You know what, kid?" He said, "You're smart. You're going to go places. That booze is going to mess you up." It went in one ear and out the other. Later, I was at a family function, and my uncle was there, and my uncle was a boss on the job, and he pulled me off to the side. He said, "You know what, Bobby? I'm hearing stories about you. You're going to get yourself in a jackpot. You better slow down." In one ear and out the other. Several years later, on 2 separate occasions, I ran into that supervisor and my uncle in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I realized at that point they were trying to 12-step me. But I remember talking to my uncle. I said, "Jimmy," I said, "how come you didn't tell me?" You know, he just smiled, like one of them old-timer smiles. He just smiled. He said, "Bobby, you just weren't ready yet." Which just goes to show you that all the drinking and all the behaviors that I got engaged in were necessary for me to hit my bottom. You know, I was the last guy to figure it out. Everybody knew I had a drinking problem, but it wasn't until I realized it I was able to do something about it. My drinking took me to a lot of my nevers, and one of those nevers was the use of other substances. What had happened, I was 24 years old, and I shot and killed a 15-year-old kid in the line at work. And it was a terrible situation that just couldn't be avoided. And a lot of help was extended to me, but I used it as an excuse to crawl in a bottle, and that's what I did for the next 3 years. I wound up getting sober when I was 27, you know, and a lot of people tried to help me, but, you know, I was just full of self-pity, you know, just wanted to milk it. And that's what I did. My drinking took me to a lot of my nevers, and one of those nevers is the use of other substances. I wound up getting promoted, and I worked in this I had this pretty nice job. One night I'm in a position, I'm drinking, obviously, so my judgment was impaired, and I was in a position where I thought I needed to do other substances. and I got involved in other substances. My drug history is very short. It only lasted 17 months, but it caused me and a lot of people a lot of grief. And I think out of the respect of the fifth tradition, that's why I need to talk about that stuff. You know, everything just went with the territory, you know. No one wanted to hang out with me no more. The guys didn't even want to work with me anymore. You know, I was engaging in unsafe behavior. I was doing all types of crazy things. I remember towards the end of my drinking, I would call friends up and say, you know, you want to go out? And they would all make stories up. I remember one night a guy said, Bobby, I'm broke. I said, that's okay. I got you covered. He says, no, I can't go out with you. And you know you're bad when you can't even buy people anymore, you know. And the drinking was ugly, and my life was just a shambles, you know. So it was Memorial Day weekend, 1988. I'm sitting in this bar, guys in my squad, we're in there drinking. And towards the end of the day, we were in there for several hours. And one of the guys I was with, he said, for some reason, he needed to leave. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a ride home, because I didn't think that I was as drunk as he was. And he thought that was a pretty good idea. So I'm in my car, you know, and I had a city car, and I was always a show-off. I was always an arrogant guy. So I want to show off my driving skills, and it's pretty tough to do when you have somebody else's car, you know. And it was not unusual for me to go like down sidewalks and things like that. So I saw a kid on a bicycle, about 3 blocks ahead of me, and I was going to play chicken with this kid, you know. And that's what I did. And unfortunately, at the last moment, we turned in the same direction. I ran this kid over. As he lay bleeding on the hood of my car, I got out of my car with my nightstick and was going to beat this kid because I thought he was milking me for an insurance claim. So I took this kid off the hood of my car, threw him off the side of the street like a piece of trash. I pulled this crumpled bicycle from underneath my car, threw that off to the side of the street like a piece of trash. I drove back to the bar, I made a remark, I scored 10 points, and I continued on drinking. When I came to the next day, I realized I was in serious, serious trouble, but I didn't think anybody would help me because I was such a creep. I used and abused everybody I came in contact with, you know. I didn't know what to do. So I got a case of beer, a bottle of liquor, and some other substances, and I checked in a hotel with the intentions to consume all this stuff to build up the courage in my life. And I couldn't shoot myself because at this point I was suspended from my job, so I no longer had access to my weapon. So on the third day, they're knocking on the hotel door to kick me out. So what I decided to do, I was going to, I still was going to end my life. So I walked over to the window, and I opened up the window, and I was going to jump out the window. And when I opened up the window, I was on the 5th floor of the hotel, and I remembered I was scared of heights, you know. I made 23 jumps in the service. I never overcame my fear of heights, you know. So then I went in the bathroom, and I filled the bathtub up with water, and I had a blow dryer, and I was going to pull the blow dryer into the tub to make it appear an accidental electrocution. But every time I would pull the blow dryer into the tub, it would come unplugged because I was about 1.5 feet short on cord. So I got 1 foot in the tub, and I'm leaning, trying to plug it in. And it's like a scene out of that Woody Allen movie where he couldn't even kill himself, you know. And it's okay to laugh, and you know, but I never want to forget the pain I was in that day. So I took the only tool that I had left was my car. So I took one last spin through my neighborhood. I started up on the East River Drive. On the top of the East River Drive was the Falls Bridge. And the East River Drive is a winding road that runs along the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. And I come down the East River Drive, and I decided I was going to end my life in an automobile accident. Now, this was like a Tuesday or Wednesday morning around 10:30, and that's important because at any other time I would have probably succeeded in my mission because this is a very heavily traveled road during rush hour, but most people are at work. It's a weekday, most people are at work. Now, I'm driving, and at the speed limit's like 25, and I'm doing about 50, and I'm flying, and I'm cooked, and I'm hungover, and I'm crying. And as I'm coming down the drive, the very first thought was, I'm going to end my life by going to oncoming traffic, because I handled enough jobs, and I knew where that was, you know, you could succeed that. So, but something hit me. I realized I didn't want to hurt anybody else. You know what? Like, I hurt everyone. Everyone I came in contact with, you know, I hurt. And I realized I didn't want to hurt anybody else, you know. And obviously I would have hurt somebody innocently who had nothing to do with me at all. But I was still in pain, and I decided I would end my life by wrapping my car around a tree. And I also knew that was pretty successful, too. And they had these big old trees that I could definitely do the job. But as I'm coming down the drive still, I'm crying. And I'm surprised I didn't get into an accident, but I now know that my higher power is looking out after me. But 15 years ago, I didn't realize that. And I finally pull over. At the end of East River Drive is Boathouse Row. And I pulled over, and I sat behind the wheel of my car, and I cried like a baby. And I need to tell you, about 6 weeks prior, I'm home from work one day, and I'm reading the Daily News, and there's an article in the paper. Alcohol problems, drug problems, depression, thoughts of suicide, mental health problems. and marital problems also. I'm looking at, and there's a phone number. And I'm looking at the ad, and they talk about the moment of clarity or sanity. I'm looking at the ad, and I'm 4 out of 5 because I'm single. And I'm sure if I was married, I would have been batting 1,000. And I look at the ad, and I say, maybe, but I says, nah. But I cut it out and stuck it in my wallet anyway, and I continued on doing my drinking. Well, that day, sitting behind the wheel of my car, I'm crying like a baby. And I reached into my glove box, and inside the glove box is my wallet, and inside that wallet was that article that I clipped out of the Daily News about 6 weeks before. And I walked over to and it's no longer there. It's one of those old glass enclosed phone booths outside the last boathouse. And I went up and I dialed the phone number up. And the woman who answered the phone, I spoke to this woman like I spoke to no one in my life before. I told her the truth. I figured I didn't know her from a can of paint. I could always hang up. But you know what? Once I started, I couldn't stop. Like everything was just coming out. And God bless her, man. She listened patiently. And when I got done, she said, listen, she said, why don't you drive over to Hahnemann Hospital and somebody waiting to talk to you? I said, okay. So I got my car, and if Hahnemann's like about a 5-minute ride, I went over, drove over to the hospital, and somebody was waiting for me. And they admitted me to their 10th floor of the psychiatric unit. And I spent about 3 days there until they got me stabilized. And from there, I got transferred to the VA hospital out in West Philadelphia. And I spent about 6 weeks in their flight deck. From there, I got transferred to the VA hospital out in Coatesville. And I spent a number of weeks in their flight deck, and then I got put into an alcohol and drug ward. Now, I need to tell you, when I pulled over that day to make that phone call, Alcoholics Anonymous was the furthest thing from my mind. See, I've gone to Alcoholics Anonymous before. I made my very first meeting in 1979. Now, I don't tell people I went out because I really never came in, but I'll tell you what happened. I showed up at work one day, and our job, we had an EAP, we had a counseling unit, and a counseling unit had an AA group attached to it. So I show up work one day, and the supervisor's there, and he says, drive this guy up to the unit. He's detailed there for the day. I said, okay. So I come down this driveway, and this little house that sat in a park is called 369. And I pulled up, and there's a guy sitting on the porch. His name was Eddie M. I says, Eddie, this guy's detailed here for the day. I'll come back at 4 o'clock to pick him up. He looked me dead in the eye. Said, kid, do you want to come in? I said, no, I don't. I was insulted that he even asked me. Because I knew what alcoholics were. Alcoholics were you older guys, or these poor guys I was dealing with day in, day out, or you married guys, or guys with 3 heads. I mean, I knew what alcoholics were. It wasn't me. There was no way I could be an alcoholic because I was a beer drinker. The only time I drank hard liquor was like on St. Patty's Day, or New Year's Day, or payday. But I was a beer drinker. And there was no way you could be an alcoholic drinking beer. And it was funny because after I got out of the VA hospital, the very first outside AA meeting I went to, Eddie was there. And as soon as I came in, he smiled. He said, so kid, you finally came around. And again, it was just goes to show you that everything I did was necessary for me to hit my bottom. Even though there were people placed in my life many times, I just disregard them because I was on that road to self-destruction. So I'm in the VA hospital. I'm getting in the alcohol and drug ward. I'm there for about 2 hours. I wandered my way down to the day room, and in the day room, up on the wall, they had the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And I go up to the steps. I zip through them. I got about 6 of them done, I think. Until I saw the part about the amends. I said, screw it, that doesn't apply to me. But what happened later that night was that 2 men came up. I would later find out that they were part of the treatment facility committee. I didn't know that then. The moment they came up and they carried the message. The moment that the speaker said something about his background that I didn't like, couldn't relate to, I didn't identify with, I would immediately tune him out. I was too busy listening to the messenger, not the message. Now I'm looking around my group, my peers, and I realized that I'm not as bad as they are. Most of them had legal problems. I certainly didn't have legal problems. It was probably because of the tin I had in my back pocket. May have helped me out a few times. A lot of these guys had marital problems. Their kids wasn't talking to them. I had no problems like that. Probably due to the fact that I've never been married, didn't have any kids. May have helped out there. These kids had some of these guys had hardcore drug problems. That certainly wasn't mine. I knew I could leave that stuff alone. I was looking for the differences and not the similarities. I was getting arrogant again. But what bothered me the most was at the end of that meeting, everyone got in a group and held hands and said the Lord's Prayer. If this is what you people were about, then I don't want nothing to do with you because I hated God. And I know they're pretty strong words, but that's what I did. I hated God. And I'll tell you why. I talk about my mom. My mom was, mentally ill, was a fundamentalist in the church. She belonged to the charismatic movement. She thought she could speak in tongues and all this other stuff. And there were programs on the radio and television and pictures and candles and all that stuff throughout the house. And I was 15 years old. I came home from school one day, and I'm in the house about 10, 15 minutes. when I finally came across my mother, she had slit her wrist. And I remember when I found her, she looked up at me, she said, "Bobby, help me." And I looked down at her and I said, "Good for you." And I walked out of the house. So I got an older guy to get me a bottle of wine. I stayed outside and drank the wine. And I came home later that night, and my dad was there, and he told me what happened, and I acted surprised. So that happened when I was 15. I didn't get sober till I was 27, so that's 12 years of hating God. And it would be a couple more years before I would even address this. So I broke away from the group. I would not say the prayer. When it came time to get out of the VA, and I need to tell you, the VA helped me a lot, but I did not get my recovery there. I got my recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. The VA helped me with a lot of things I had going on. And I'm about to say this, and please, it's not to get a joke. There was a nurse there, and man, she was a godsend. And I really believe she had to be a member of Al-Anon. And you know why? Because she saw through all my BS. And that's what I did there. I put the wall up again after a period of time. I wouldn't let anybody in, and she saw right through that. And she came up to me the day I was getting out, and she said, "You know what?" She said, "The only way you're going to make it is that you need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous." And I need to tell you that's the best piece of advice I got. So I went to AA every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, you know. And but I don't drink coffee, so I don't make it. I don't smoke cigarettes, so I don't empty any ashtrays. I didn't take your phone numbers because most of your screwballs, I don't believe you anyway, you know. I walked into a step meeting or a big book meeting that strictly by accident. I would leave it to break because I had something more important to do. God forbid tradition meetings, rules. I need to tell you my line of work. We love to enforce them. We don't like to follow them. They're for the other people, you know. So, but I made meetings every single day, and man, I was crazy as a bedbug. I remember I was sitting in this bar one day. I was sober about 10 months, drinking seltzer out of a rock glass, of course, and because they had real good roast beef. And if you told me why I was there, that's the story I would have given you back then. I now know that I was there for another reason. But however, eating roast beef, drinking seltzer, and a couple guys from the neighborhood came in and they started giving me a hard way to go. See, because what I was very successful in my job. I did very well, and there was a lot of publicity. Well, towards the end of my drinking and the behavior I engaged in, there was a lot of negative publicity. And the truth was I was there because I was arrogant. I was back, and I wanted the other people in the neighborhood knew that I was back. That don't believe the hype, that I'm okay. But these guys came in, they start breaking my stones. One thing led to another, and I just had enough. I said, "The hell with this." So I took the glass I was drinking, the rock glass, and I just punched this guy right in the face. And I cut him severely. He bled like a pig. And a couple guys who handled the job who came in, they saw me and they cut me a break and they let me go. And they said, "Bobby, get the hell out of here." And that's where I learned my lessons about people, places, and things. And I have since found a place that sells real roast beef without being in that type of environment. You know, it's just nuts. I remember I was celebrated my year anniversary, and I told my story, and it was amazing. I got done speaking, thunderous applause. People came up and they patted me in the back. You know, they said, "Bobby, you're doing so good." You know, the lame walked, the blind could see. It was just an incredible experience. But when they patted me in the back and said, "Bobby, you're doing so good," I felt like I was dying inside because I lied during the entire story. First of all, my home group at that time, you needed to identify yourself as an alcoholic and nothing else. And I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I thought it was my short use of other substances. If I left that stuff alone, I'd be okay. Maybe I got this mental illness and I inherited this from my mother. Maybe I got this stress stuff they're now talking about. I got this from my job, or I got this from my experience in the service. Maybe it's the fact that I'm a mummer. Maybe it's the neighborhood I live in. But it can't be alcohol because I'm a beer drinker. You know? It's just nuts. So when they patted me in the back and said, "Bobby, you're doing so good," I was dying inside. You know? I love the old timers there, right? Man, but I hated them too, you know? Because they would never ask me to go out with them. And then when they asked me to go out with them, I would say no, because I had something else to do. But I wanted to go out with them. And I got mad when they didn't ask me. But when they asked me, I'd say no. It was just nuts. And I would go, and the only time I get my hand up was to share from the floor, was to take a shot at somebody. I mean, I was crazy, you know. I was just nuts. I was 23 months. I swear to God, I beat another man with a baseball bat. I forget what step I was working that day. But I was just... But people would say, "Just don't drink," you know. And I said, "Okay." And I just didn't drink. And I did everything wrong you could do in Alcoholics Anonymous. The only thing I didn't pick up a drink. I didn't believe you people with time, you know. I made my first outside meeting, and so I spent almost 6 months in various nut wards. My first outside meeting, there's a guy from my neighborhood. He's sober like 14, 15 months. I knew he was nuts. I said, but all you other people, my very first outside meeting, there was a husband and wife celebrating 10 years. The wife had one more day than her husband. And she constantly reminded him throughout her share. She had one more day. I didn't believe these guys. At 10 years, how can you go 10 years? Like, I tried to stop drinking. I would try to give it up for Lent or give it up because the girlfriend I had at the time, or I was give it up for because I was getting jammed up at work by abuse of sick time. But I can never stay stopped. But you guys with 10 years, I thought, you know what? I thought maybe you drank in Jersey and keep your Pennsylvania time. Or you had all this other crazy. I couldn't fathom you guys like 10, 15, 20 years without a drink. But it was the new people that I saw, you know. But I hated everybody. I swear to God, I had no idea who John Barleycorn was. I remember it was unbelievable. And once I found out who John Barleycorn was, I felt so stupid. Here I was, so damn bright, it damn near killed me, you know. I remember the guys they came up to one and they tricked me. It's pretty easy to trick newcomers. They came up to me and they asked me a question. They said, "Bobby, are you working this weekend?" And before I could say it, no came out. I said no. I wish I would have said something else like why or whatever, but I said no. They said, "Great, we're going on a retreat this weekend. We want to take you on a retreat with us." Now, again, doing things in my gut that I'm uncomfortable with, but that need to be accepted outweighed anything else. So I never told anybody about my mom. And they knew that I had a problem because I wouldn't say a prayer. And just not only that, but my behavior was just nuts. In the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, stone cold sober, and I was still nuts. So they were taking me on this retreat. And it's funny because I'm in the back seat of the car with a guy on each side of me. It's like role reversal. At work, I'm usually driving, but here I'm in the back seat. And so the closer we get to the retreat house, the bigger the knot gets in my stomach. But I couldn't tell anybody. I'm at the retreat house about 15, 20 minutes when I run into the retreat master. As soon as he saw me, he smiled. His eyes lit up. He's my disciplinarian from high school. But not only that, but he was also a longtime member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He smiled. He put his arm around me. He said, "How you doing? You know, good to see you. And wanted to know how long I'm sober, where I'm going to meetings. I'm telling him what the deal was." He said, "That's great." He said, "Who's your sponsor?" I said, "I don't have one." So I'm a pretty bright guy. I didn't tell him. He knew I was a bright guy. I didn't tell him that, but I said, "I don't have one." He said, "I strongly suggest you get a sponsor." I said, "Okay." So I asked my roommate to be my sponsor. God forbid, just in case I should ever be questioned again. "Bobby, who's your sponsor?" There he goes. He's right there. That's my sponsor. I tell you, I never talked to this guy. The only time I talked to him is when I accidentally bumped into him in the meetings. He would wave to me and say, "Bobby, I still got that same phone number." I said, "Yeah, I'll give you a call." Know what I used to do? I used to tell my friends, "You won't believe this guy. He got me doing this, he's doing this, doing that." I lied. I made it all up. The guy put the hand of AA, the hand of help out there, and I slapped it away. And then I character assassinated the guy, talked crap about the guy. A solid member of AA, you know. Not me, he was. He definitely was. I was sober. My second anniversary came, and it came and went, and I didn't celebrate it. 1 month after my second anniversary, I went to eat my gun. The same pathetic feeling I had 25 months before, but 25 months before I'm loaded with drugs and alcohol. Here I am, stone cold sober, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. I can count on one hand how many times I met more than one day without a meeting. And I went to eat my gun. Safe to assume my life was unmanageable, you know. I swear to God, I'm not proud of this, but my home group, we had a cork board, first name, last initial, date, a month, and how many years, you know, anniversaries with a month. Joey A got 2 years. Bobby C got 1. Joey A went out. I used to take pleasure in that. I said, good for him. He's out. I'm up. I was caught up. I know it's sick, but I was about seniority. If you had more time and you went out, it's a good for you. I move up. No one asked me to be their sponsor. No one wanted what the hell I had. I didn't carry the message. I carried the disease. I was nuts. You know? Yep. So I'm 25 months. I went to eat my gun. I see this guy at one time in a meeting, and this guy, his nickname was Troubles. It was a hard-earned nickname, but no one ever called him Troubles because he was nuts. So I saw him at a meeting one time, and he was sober, and I knew he was for real because it wasn't in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was in the neighborhood. He had this glow about him. I knew he was for real. He was doing the right thing. He was treating women with respect. He was actually walking the steps, walking the way of life outside AA. And I sat down one day and I asked him. I said, Bobby, I need some help. He looked at me. He said, Bobby, I've been watching these past couple of years. I'm sticking my chest out. I said, yeah, he likes me. He said, I need to tell you. He said, you're full of shit. That's not the response I'm looking for. He said, I'll be your sponsor. He said, I'll be your sponsor under certain conditions. A, you're going to call me every single day. You're going to go to a big book meeting a week. You're going to go to a step meeting a week. You're going to go to a men's meeting. You're going to get yourself a coffee commitment, and you're going to leave them damn women alone. And I'm saying to myself, like, who's he talking to? I'm sober 25 months. I'm selling the grapevines. Like, I got it going on here. But what I did do, I looked them dead in the eye and I said, that's okay, that's what I'm willing to do. And that's the night that I worked the first 3 steps, you know, because I definitely knew that I was powerless over alcohol. And like I said, I went to eat my gun. My life was certainly unmanageable, you know. And so if I was powerless, then, you know, the problem had to be power greater than me, and it certainly wasn't me, you know. So, you know, I hated everybody, you know, besides God. I hated everybody. But, you know, I saw these guys coming in behind me. I hated them the most. How dare they get better before me? Because I told you I'm about the seniority bit, right? If you went out, I took pleasure in that. But these guys are like a year. I'm sober 25 months. I see these guys a year, 18 months sober, and they got this glow about them. I hated them the most. How dare they get it before me? But the truth was, they got involved in a program of action before I did. I just showed up. That's all I did. I didn't do anything else but show up. I used to go to a lot of go-go bars in my early recovery, right? I drank soda. And I would get my picture taken, right, with the entertainer. And I would pass these pictures around to the old-timers because I figured they would like that. They would look at the picture, and they would look at me, and they would just shake their head and said, kid, please keep coming back. And I thought they were being facetious. I said, all right, I'll keep coming back. I was just nuts. I'm telling you, I was nuts. I did everything wrong in AA. I didn't pick up a drink, but I was nuts. I was a liar, thief, and cheat, stone cold sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I 13-step people. I was a creep. Stone cold sober, I was a creep. This guy saw through it. He called me on it. After the meeting, he invited me back to his house. We went over the first 2 steps. We got on our knees together, and we said the 3rd step prayer. He told me, Bobby, this is the program. He held up the big book. This is the way we get sober. You don't know anything about it. Just follow these directions. He said the way we do a 3rd step is, after we said the prayer, we start doing our inventory. Now, I don't want to do one of these because I'm going to meetings. People say, whoa, easy does it. Don't want to get well too soon, do you? Yeah, and all this other crazy stuff. And I said, yeah, right, I don't want to get well too soon. I don't want to do one of these inventories. I'm going to meetings and people say, whoa, you may get drunk. Well, you know what? I went to eat my pistol making regular attendance in meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew that I needed to do this inventory. Even though I was scared of it, I knew I needed to do it because I wasn't doing nothing and I was on my way out the door anyway. I did my inventory and you know what? It wasn't that bad. Everything I wrote down, I did. The scary part was the next step, though, talking to somebody about it. I wasn't about that. But I'm a pretty bright guy. So I called my sponsor up. I said, Bobby, I'm going to go on a retreat and do my 5th step with a priest. He said, Bobby, that's great. When you get done, stop by my house. You'll do it with me. And you know how it is sometimes with sponsors. Like, you know, like, what are you, deaf? You didn't hear what I said? And he must have picked up on that. He said, I heard you. He said, did you hear me? And then before I could tell him why, he told me why. He said, Bobby, he said, I'm your sponsor. He said, this is a journey. We're walking together. If I'm supposed to help you change, I think I at least need to know what we need to change together here. And the truth was, I wanted to do the 5th step, even though I had wrote God in the church down on the resentment list. That resentment was still there. It didn't go away. The truth was, there were a lot of things I was embarrassed about. And I figured if I did my 5th step with a priest, it would be between me, him, and a lamppost. Nobody else would know. And if I would do my 5th step with my sponsor, he would ridicule me, you know, he'd pass judgment on me, or even worse, he would tell other people. I had a lot of fears I still didn't address. I never did that 5th step with the priest, and I did that 5th step with my sponsor. And you know what? Those things that I had were unfounded fears, because he did none of those things. He didn't pass judgment on me. He didn't ridicule me. And to the best of my knowledge, he never told anybody else. In fact, what he did, he shared some of his experience with me, which took away the feeling that I was the only person to do certain things or have certain thoughts. And I'll be forever grateful for him for doing that. You know, it took away that terminal uniqueness that I thought that I had. And it was powerful. And he had a quiet room set up in his house, and I guess he didn't trust me. He said, sit here quietly for the hour. And you know what? I can only talk about my experience. You know, I go to a lot of step meetings. I hear 5th step, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about this part. This is where the power really got a hold of me, you know. When I got done, sit quietly, because I could never sit quietly. I couldn't sit quietly for 4 or 5 minutes. When I would go to meetings, a real serene meeting, serene people scared the hell out of me. So I would get my hand up to get the crazy meeting. I would give my insanity and set the meeting off. And then once the meeting got insane, I sat back and watched the show. I love that. You know the old saying, peace of mind, you can't miss what you never had? Well, I never had a peace of mind. I never missed it. And I could never sit quietly. I was very rambunctious. But I sat quietly for that hour, and I did it without looking at a clock or a watch. In fact, I think it wound up was like an hour and 15 minutes. He came up and got me. And it was incredible. And my experience is that the screaming inside stopped. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but you know what, man? It was a hell of a relief to me, you know. I didn't burn my fourth step because he said I needed these for the rest of the steps, 6 and 7. And I didn't know what character defects were. I know when I drank, I was a character. The truth was, when I did my inventory, I found I had no character whatsoever. Like I said, I was a liar, thief, and a cheat. I wasn't a brother or a son or an uncle or none of that stuff. You know, I compromised in the principles and the values that were instilled in me by the nuns, by the men on my job, by my family. Put legs on those prayers, you know. I can pray all day long, but you know what? If I'm not taking the action, the prayer goes for naught. You know, I have a laundry list of character defects. And one of them may be, let's say I'm not the most patient guy, you know. I may not be the most patient person. And I can pray all day long, God, help me be patient, help me be patient. But should I be put in a position during the course of the day and someone pushes my buttons or I lash out in sarcasm, and sarcasm's nothing but anger, you know. It's also referred to as language of the Irish. But, you know, that's all it is. All it is just anger. If I lash out in sarcasm, that prayer for patience goes out the window. You know, God will do for me what I can't do for myself, but I need to do the work. The 8th step, because I didn't burn my 4th step, half my 8th step was done. And I had to throw some more names down on there, you know. I used to be one of those guys, when I would share in a step meeting, I would get my hand up and say, well, I never harmed anybody but myself. Right there was a tip-off. I never did my inventory. Because when I did my inventory, I found out I harmed everybody I came in contact with, but unfortunately those closest to me the most, I harmed the most. The 9th step, direct amends. No letters, no phone calls from me, because I didn't beat you with a bat over the phone or through the mail. And when I would try to do those measures, well, you know, he no longer lives in the neighborhood, he lives down the shore or something like that. My response is, I don't care. He says, if once you did write letters or phone calls, it would say indirect amends, direct amends, face to face, you know. And I'd like to share 2 experiences on that 9th step. I'm at a meeting, I guess about 10 years ago. I have not seen this guy since 1977. He walked through the steps, came down the steps. I haven't seen him since then. It was not through any fear. This man was not on my 8th step list. I just plain forgot, you know, out of sight, out of mind. But you know what? As soon as I saw him, I recognized him, and I knew that he needed to be on my 8th step. What I used to do, I used to publicly humiliate this guy. I remember we were in a bar one day. We had, you know, there was an exchange of words, and he kind of backed down. So from that point on, whenever I wanted to impress anybody how tough or nuts I was, I would pick on this guy as a bully, and he was much larger than I am. And I'm not a tough guy, I never was. But I would verbally abuse him. One day I slapped him. I mean, one day I even spit on him. I mean, what worse, like utter degradation and spitting on your fellow human being, and that's what I did to him. But he would never respond. He didn't recognize me, by the way. I'm at this meeting, so I get introduced to speak, and I stand up, and I look this guy dead in the eye. I said, my name is Bobby Coyle. I'm an alcoholic. Now, for a moment here, I need to tell you why I use my full name. I know these traditions are top secret, and we're not even going to touch on the concepts. That comes later. But my experience in a lot of these traditions are misunderstood, and no more so than this 11th tradition. All of a sudden, we get sober, you know, and it's like we join the mafia. We get a nickname. We have Frank the Fox and Mike the Monk and, you know, Jimmy the Coat and Bucktooth Mary and Red Sweater Jerry, you know. Nonsense. You know, all of a sudden I get sober. I don't want no one to know I'm sober. When I was a drunk, everybody in my neighborhood knew. It was those little telltale signs. They came out of the house and they caught me, I'd be urinating on their car. My girlfriend threw the clothes out the window. You know, everyone knows I'm a drunk. All of a sudden I get sober. God forbid my reputation be tarnished. You know, the 11th tradition is real clear. It talks about personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. That means that you will never see my picture and my full name, which happens to be Robert Ignatius Benedict Coyle III, stating that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You won't find that on the television, on the newspaper, or you won't hear my full name mentioning I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous on the radio. That's the 11th tradition. In fact, Dr. Bob, for those who read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, that's why I always cite the source, because I don't want people to think I'm making this up. Dr. Bob said when one drunk is anonymous from another drunk, that's a violation for the 11th tradition. He went on to say that anonymity is spiritually inspired and secrecy is fear-inspired. I mean, what happens 3 o'clock in the morning? You feel like drinking. You want to call information? Yeah, I'd like to have Frank the Fox's phone number. Or you want to go visit one of these old-timers and you're going to go to the hospital and say, yeah, what room's Jimmy the Coat in? I mean, if they got a psych ward, they're going to put you in, you know. It's not a secret society. However, I have no right whatsoever to break anybody else's anonymity. And that's where it comes in, and if you choose not to identify yourself by your full name, that's cool. I respect that. But I was very involved in service back home, and in service we use our full names because what are you going to see, Bobby the cop or Bobby C? It's not going to happen. I give my full name because my name's listed in the phone book. I dropped the Benedict. It just says Robert Ignatius Coyle III. But you call information, you'll get my phone number. So off that soapbox. So I see this kid in the meeting. I say, my name's Bobby Coyle, and I'm an alcoholic. And he looked at me, and, we sober up, we clean up, and we start nodding. He nodded his head. When I got done, I told the group what I used to do to him. I figured if I publicly humiliated him, I should at least make amends to him publicly. And I was also told this night that these amends are much more than saying I'm sorry. Because for me, I'm sorry are two words that didn't mean squat. Making the amends is about righting the wrong. If I owe you money, I go in your pocket, my pocket, not your pocket. Freudian slip. I go in my pocket, I make amends. I work something out here. But what about that emotional damage or that psychological damage? How do I make the amends for that, And I was taught that I have conversations with people, and I assume that role I used to have. I become a better son, a better brother, a better partner, a better uncle, whatever the case may be. So I told the group what I used to do. When I got done speaking, this kid, he came up and he hugged me. It was an incredible experience. So now we start talking. Now, like I said, I haven't seen this guy. This is 10 years ago. I haven't seen him since 77. I started talking to him. His name was Bob also. No, his name was also Bob. It wasn't Bob A. His name was also Bob. I saw and I said, Bob, what's going on? He said, Bobby, he said, I'm sober 3 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. No, all of a sudden the arrogance creeps back in me because I'm sober a few years. I'm very involved in service. I figured if you're sober in AA in Philadelphia, you should at least know who I am. And I started talking to him. He said, Bobby, I'm sober 3 years. And I need to tell you, at this time, I'm living in South Philadelphia. He's living in Roxborough, which is like northwest Philadelphia. And this particular meeting we're at this night is in North Philadelphia. And I started talking to him, and he said, the reason I came here tonight, I was flipping through the meeting directory, and I just wanted to go to a different meeting. And for some reason, this meeting jumped out at me. Now, our meeting directory is like 70 pages. We have 1,600 meetings a week. I am a firm believer that God put that guy in my path that night. And I had two options. I could make amends, or I could do what I always did before. If you ever confronted me, the nice thing about having 7 siblings, like my mother was pregnant for 9 years, like one after another. The nice thing about that is there's always a strong resemblance. So when someone would come up and confront me on something, I say, oh, you got me confused. You're talking about my brother Brian or somebody else, not me. But what I did, I took the opportunity, I made amends. He forgave me, and it was a great experience. The flip side of that, I'm at a business meeting. My home group at this time was the Stepping Stones group, and I made a motion. It was definitely for the betterment of AA since I made it. There's discussion goes on, and my boy Freddie's there, and Freddie doesn't agree with me. In fact, he leads the so-called opposition. My motion doesn't even get seconded. It goes down in flames. And I'm embarrassed, humiliated at group level. But most of all, Freddie broke the cardinal rule. We grew up in a neighborhood, right, wrong, or different, you always backed your boy. It didn't matter. I mean, it may be warped, but you know what? We got certain rules. Like you can never date your friend's ex. I don't care, hey, Jimmy, I know you dated her in the 6th grade, but I know I can't talk to her. It's just a neighborhood thing. But you always backed your boy, and I could not believe that he didn't have my back on this. So I would never talk to him again. I would come into meetings. There'd be 4 men sitting at the table. I'd say hi to 3 of them. I would have completely ignored Freddie. One day I'm at work, and one of my coworkers came up to me and said, Bobby, Freddie Wheels is outside. He went to take care of some sort of business. I peeked out the window. I saw him out there sitting in his car. I said, you know what? Tell him to take his fat ass down to City Hall. He needs to do that there. He can't do that here. My coworker also was sober in the program. A couple of weeks later, that same coworker called me up. He said, Bobby, he said, Freddie Wheels died last night. And he said, the reason I'm calling you is because he always spoke so highly of you. Now, here he was, a very good friend of mine, and as God is my judge, I can't tell you what that motion was about. That's how petty it was. This guy was put in my path many, many times. I had the opportunity to make amends to him. I chose not to, And when the moment my coworker said, Bobby, he always spoke so highly of you, I felt about yay big. And I've been praying for Freddie ever since. See, the key word in that 9th step is wherever possible, not whenever. Because whenever denotes time, wherever's place. And for us, it's never the right time because we're too busy easy doesn't it. Or keeping it simple, or all this other stuff that I hear. The 10th step for me is nothing but 4 through 9 on a regular basis, Now, if I'm going to stand up here and tell you I do a 10th step every day, that'd not be true. I used to also say that if I'm not doing the 10th step, no one else knows it but me. That's not true either. Because when I'm not practicing these principles, I become a nitwit. And should you cross my path when I'm in nitwit mode, you also are affected. Either I'm rude to you or something else can happen. I also affect you. And like I said earlier, you know that old saying, that peace of mind, you can't miss what you never had. See, the nice thing about going through the steps, I now know what I need to do. When I'm off the beam, I know what I need to do to get back on the beam. And that's what the 10th step is. And I'm pretty consistent at it, you know. But it's funny because every time I stop, I try to stay sober on yesterday's sobriety, right? Every time I do it, I always pay for it. And I even laugh at myself. I said, like, when are you ever going to figure this out? Because I always kick myself in the backside because I feel so stupid because I know I need to do this, you know. The 11th step through prayer and meditation, I improve my conscious contact with my higher power. Now, I may not pray and meditate the way I was indoctrinated as a kid, but you know what? I no longer blame the church. The church wasn't the problem. The Air Force wasn't the problem. The police department wasn't the problem. My mother wasn't the problem. She was just mentally ill. It was none of that stuff. It wasn't the neighborhood I lived in. The problem was Bobby Coyle. The problem was me long before I picked up a drink. All during my drinking, I definitely was the problem. And you know what? When I put the drink down, I was still the problem because I was running on self-will. You know, there's a lot of things about my past that I'm not proud of, and if I could change them in a heartbeat, I would, but I can't, you know. But the deal is, you know what, the steps, it enables me to change my attitude about my past. You know, it helps me tremendously in a lot of areas, you know. The 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening, as the result of these steps, I've had a spiritual awakening. Now, I haven't seen any burning bushes or lightning bolts or haven't heard voices from above. In fact, it's been a number of years since I heard any voices at all, and I'm really, truly grateful for that. But I've had that spiritual awakening, you know. I've had that change of attitude that's required as a result of doing these steps. We tried to carry this message. Sometimes my sponsor needs to remind me about that word try. You know, I mean, you're looking at a guy for 2 years, I just showed up at meetings, I didn't do nothing else. Then all of a sudden I got involved in a big book, and I started doing the steps. Then I had my fireman's hat on, I went to save the world. I went through my evangelical stage of recovery, you know. It's this way, if you're not doing it this way, you're wrong, and I want to show you in the book, and when I wanted to get done, I would have backhand you with the book, you know. I remember I was at a meeting one time, and I knew I was preaching, and the guy came up to me afterwards, and I'm really grateful for the way he did this. He said, you know what, kid? He said, you have a wonderful message. He said, but you know what? You come off arrogant. He said, we share our experience and hope. We don't preach. And you know what? And that's something I just evolved over the years. I just had to get more comfortable. And I'm glad he told me in the way he told me, because if he told me any other way, I would have told him go to hell or something, you know. But he cared enough about me, you know, and you know, so I put the fireman's hat down. But I still carry the message. But I don't compromise the message because it says practice these principles in all of our affairs. See, there's a lot of nonsense. I go to meetings, I hear things, I got to look up at the slogans and make sure I'm in an AA meeting, you know. I want to be liked. If I say I don't, that wouldn't be true. I want to be liked. But you know what? Not to the point where I'm going to compromise the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I compromised the principles that were instilled in me in every other area of my life, and I paid the price. You know what? The 12th step, we have a whole chapter. It tells us how to 12th step people. You know, it says don't talk down or preach or do any of that other stuff. It gives us clear-cut directions on how to 12th step people. And that's what we're supposed to do. Because the preamble says our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. If I'm only staying sober, not helping other alcoholics, that's half measures, and half measures avail us nothing. The 12th step, practice these principles in all my affairs. I'm only in an AA meeting an hour and a half a day. What about the other 22 and a half hours? You know, I don't need to run around and tell people I'm an Alcoholics Anonymous. But you know what? I can't be doing all that other street behavior and claim to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous because people watch. I remember 10 years ago, my neighbor called me up. He lived right across the street from my dad. His name was Joe. Joe owned the corner bar. And in my neighborhood, there was a bar on every corner. There were tap rooms. They used to have like ladies' entrance in the back, but you know, there's a tap room on every corner. And Joe's bar was the toilet of a bar. In fact, if you said, where's the toilet? I said, you're standing in it. It's right here. Towards the end of my drinking, Joe wouldn't let me in the bar anymore. And he saw me grow up. He knew what I did for a living. None of that mattered. He told me. He said, Bobby, I don't care. He said, you just can't come in his bar. And he used some colorful language to describe what he would do to me if I should go in his bar. So I said, all right, I just went to another bar. About 10 years ago, Joe called my dad up, and then my dad called me. I said, please, give my number to anyone. Anyone calls, you know. So Joe called me up. He said, Bobby, you still go to the AA meetings? I said, yeah, Joe, I do. See, he knew. Because in my neighborhood, like, bad news travels quickly. You know, so-and-so violated their parole, or so-and-so got divorced. You know, I don't know why they were on the grapevine. No one wants to talk about the good stuff, but we always took pleasure in people not doing so well. But he knew I was still going to AA because he saw the way I was carrying myself, you know. Because if I wasn't practicing these principles, the word would have been out there. Oh, he busted out. Look out. So he called me up and he said, listen, he said, my nephew Jimmy See, Joe's brother and his wife were killed in an automobile accident a few years before that. His brother had 3 kids. Joe had 3 of his own, and he took his nephews and nieces in and raised his kids as his own. I mean, I think that's a real man. That Joe's a saint. And he called me up. He said, Bobby, and his nephew was 17 years old. He said, Jimmy just got a treatment. Can you take him to an AA meeting? I mean, this is the same guy that 10 years before, he was threatening me with bodily harm if I went near the toilet of his bar he had. Now he's allowing me to, he wants me to take his 17-year-old nephew, almost his son, to an AA meeting, you know. That's a reward of the program, you know. And I need to tell you, Jimmy is a fine member of Alcoholics Anonymous today. Just celebrated 10 years sobriety. He's in school. He's married. He has a kid. He's incredible. But you know what? I carried the same message to him that I carried to countless other guys. And I can't claim success for that because it's not my success. It's God's success. Because if I want to claim responsible for Jimmy getting sober, then I need to accept the responsibility for the countless men who didn't get sober. And I carry the same message. I don't dress it up because my sponsor told me, he said, Bobby, we can't compromise the message. The book says speak freely about the higher power, the spiritual aspect of this program. If I go to 12 steps somebody and I don't mention God, then I'm lying to you, you know, because it's I. Left to my own devices, I'm a liar, thief, and a cheat, you know. So I then got involved in service, and I learned about the 12 traditions, and I love the traditions, you know. The traditions are to the groups what the steps are to the individuals, you know. You hear the steps are how it works, and the traditions are why it works. And I got involved in service, and then I wound up getting another sponsor. Back in Philly, we have a big thing, service sponsors. Now, my sponsor, Bobby, helped me tremendously through the 12. I had a sponsor who was involved in the traditions, and we learned about the concepts and some great stuff, you know. And the 12-step takes many different forms or fashions, you know. I am a firm believer that every person in this room has a gift. It may be different gift than the person sitting next to you, but it's your gift. You just need to find out what it is. I mean, there's some of us who have time on our hands and we can get involved in the area or the central office. And within the area and the central office, there's various 12-step committees. You know, there's PI, public information. There's treatment facilities. There's, you know, CPC. That's CPC, not PCP. CPC. The cooperation with professional community, taking professionals to students. There's correction facilities. I know prisons aren't for everyone, you know, but I remember one day my sponsor called me up a few weeks in advance. He said, Bobby, he said, we're going up to Holmesburg, which was the prison in Philadelphia at the time, in 2 weeks. I said, I'm not going up. He said, you are. I said, I'm not. He said, you are. So I went. But, you know, I didn't want to go because I thought because what I did for a living, I couldn't go up there. I thought I would need to use colorful language or all that other stuff. And he saw right through that. He said, Bobby, they just want a message of hope. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. So we went up there. But the day before we went, I realized it was Monday night. So it was Sunday the day before. The Eagles were playing the Cowboys on Monday Night Football. Now I really don't want to go. So I called my sponsor up. I got a lie prepared. He sees right through it. He said, Bobby, you gave me your word. That's a commitment. He said, besides, if you pick up a drink, he says, I don't think Randall Cunningham's going to come over and 12-step your ass. I'll be there at 7 o'clock to pick him up. So he picks me up. We have dinner. We go up to Holmesburg. We get buzzed through the whole process. We go to the meeting. No one shows up. They're all on the block watching the game. So we leave the prison. I'm driving down 95 in my car, and now I really got an attitude, you know. And my sponsor says, Bobby, you don't get it, you're selfish SOB. He said, we're here just in case. We are responsible for the effort and not the outcome. Don't forget the few hours we had dinner tonight, we came up, this is the few hours that we didn't drink. We're there, we're the messengers just in case. That's why he keeps on reminding me of that word try. We tried to carry the message. As long as I give it my honest effort, that's okay, you know. So I learned about the traditions, you know, and I start going to places where I normally wouldn't go, you know. I remember the first time I went to a meeting outside my neighborhood, the very first thought was, they're doing it wrong. And I now know they're not doing it wrong. The message is the same. The delivery may be different. 12 years ago, I was in Mexico. I thought I could speak Spanish. I was the only English-speaking person in the room. Those poor people probably still figuring out what the hell I said. Like, my Spanish, consisted of, Dame Pistola, give me your gun, things like that. That was my crash course. So I'm at this meeting. I'm speaking Spanish, and I could see the bewildered look at their face. So I'd switched over to English, and they still don't know what the hell I was saying. But you know what? After the meeting, they came up and they hugged me. And I could tell who the newcomer was by their pain in their face, and I could tell who the old-timer was by their surrender in their face. You know what? They didn't understand the words, but you know what? Language of the heart. They understood. Incredible experience, you know. 1993, I got diagnosed with lung cancer. It was a real fluke way I found out. I never smoked in my life. a little pot for a short period of time, but that don't count. But never smoked. So I went to go get a second opinion, and it got confirmed. And I remembered, like, I didn't handle this so well because I'm sober for a few years. You know, I got things going on here, and my sponsor saw right through it. He said, "Bobby, what are you going to do?" So I wound up going through treatment, lung cancer. And I got sick, and I went in remission, and I got sick again, very sick, where they wound up removing the lower left lobe of my lung. Now, the good thing about this, if there is a good thing, it certainly, I guess the Irish Catholic guilt that I had growing up, it certainly helps get that ninth step done. That's one thing it did, you know. But after I got out of the hospital, I was laid up in my house, and I couldn't make meetings, and I always made meetings, always, you know. And when you have 1,600 meetings a week, you can't get an excuse not to make a meeting. I mean, I love midnight meetings. Midnight meetings are either the most spiritual meetings or the most bizarre meetings. There's no middle ground. It's like the witching hour or serenity. No middle ground at all. But I made a lot of meetings, and I couldn't make meetings anymore. You know, I was laid up in the house, and people start coming to my house and carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm talking about people I really didn't even know that well. A lot of my friends came, but people that I met at the assembly, they would come to my house, you know, carrying the message. I mean, you're looking at a liar, thief, and a cheat. I took from everyone. The only thing I gave was heartache and misery, and people came to my house to carry the message. Now, I'm a firm believer that the doctors did a pretty good job, but I'm definitely a believer that it was the prayers in AA that helped me tremendously, you know, and I keep on plugging. You know, I may have had an excuse to go out and get loaded once I found out I got sick. But you know what? I didn't have a reason to go out and get loaded. I got a pretty good life today, you know. I talked about earlier, I finished this up, I mentioned being a mummer. Some of you who came up to me, you were from the Philadelphia area, you understood. Described this. In Philadelphia, on New Year's Day, we do the Mummers Parade. Now, this has been going on for hundreds of years. But in 1901, the city had to organize the mayhem because it was getting too nuts. So it's organized mayhem. It's what it is. It's men in sequins, feathers, and makeup, and we dance in the middle of the street. You know, I've done a fist step. I'm free. You know, no big deal. But we spoof everyone. Like, you know, we're not politically correct. Please don't be upset. But everyone's fair game, as they should be. You know, and it's just a great time. But what it is, it's a big drunk fest. It's like a joint venture between the Mardi Gras and the Full Monty. It's and I personally think we make the Mardi Gras look like a bunch of Mormons. Just nuts. But it's the longest continuous parade in the country. It goes about 12 hours. There's 30,000 of us. This is incredible. The Mardi Gras, they break it up, you know, 5-6 hours over a 3-day period. But it's just nuts. So I'm a lifelong mummer, right? I'm in a midnight meeting 13 years ago. And in a midnight meeting, I'm telling my story, and the kid came up to me afterwards. He said, "Listen, would you be interested in watching the parade this year?" I said, "You're out of your mind." I said, "People, place, and things. I got no business at all to be on Broad Street on New Year's Day." He said, "No, you don't understand." He said, "We're starting a brand new brigade this year, the 12 Steppers, sober mummers." Now, that's an oxymoron, sober mummer. So what I did, I got involved back in the mummers parade. And, in fact, this past year was my 12th year up the street with the 12 Steppers. There's only me and 2 other guys are the original guys left. This year will be our 13th parade. This year will also be my 35th parade. You know, I'm able to do something that was a big part of my family, big part of my life. I had to give it up when I first got sober, but here I am sober, enjoying life. And the reason I put that out, because one of my favorite sayings in the big book says, we absolutely insist on enjoying life. You know, if the newcomers, you know, if they couldn't see this, they wouldn't want nothing to do with us. Now, obviously, I just paraphrase that. Bill's much more eloquent than I am. But the deal is, if you're new and you think you got to wear the hair shirt and beat yourself, man, you're greatly mistaken. Whatever you did drunk, you could do stone cold sober. You know, you could be better at it. You have more fun. And most of all, you can remember it. It's a blast. And I figured if I can do Broad Street on New Year's Day in Philadelphia, anything is possible. So it's a wonderful way of life. I'll close with this. I'm not the poster boy of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I invite you, come live with me for a week. See what type of guy that I am. You know, but, you know, I know I'm not intentionally harming people. I make mistakes. But making mistakes not going to get me drunk. It's justifying those mistakes, not learning from those mistakes. That's the arrogance that gets me drunk. You know, I'm just a regular guy trying to do the right thing. And I really believe today that I'm a man of dignity and honor, and I got that because of the old-timers. They tolerated my nonsense, my BS. They called me on it. They helped me grow up. I mean, I got sober, I was 27, but I was just a kid. Emotionally, I was immature, you know. So I'm glad I'm sober. I'm truly grateful I'm sober. And I'd like to thank the committee and the rest of you for the privilege of participating in an AA meeting. That's all I got. Thanks.